good morning, good afternoon, everybody who is following us online. My name is Nicola Zingales. I'm a professor at FGV Law School in Rio de Janeiro and the coordinator of the e-commerce research group. And it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar on platform regulation in the G20, a plural approach to digital media governance, together with my colleague Mariana Lameiras from UN University in Braga, Portugal. And so we have with us a fantastic lineup of speakers to discuss some of the most challenging issues when it comes to platform governance. And particularly, I would like to give some context by mentioning why we are doing these webinars. These webinars are a series of events that aim to promote some of the most leading voices when it comes to a discussion of policy issues that are relevant for the G20 agenda. In particular, recognizing that right now is the Brazilian presidency of the agenda, and that we will have a series of important meetings coming up in Brazil to deal with some of these issues. And so we decided to invite a number of key voices that are important contributors to this debate. In particular, I would like to mention here the working group on media plurality, information integrity and media plurality, of which I'm a member, and which counts with the contribution of the Brazilian Consumer Protection Institute, the Global Digital Justice Forum, and with Article 19, all of which are represented in this webinar. Then we will have the participation of the Secretariat of Digital Policy and Social Media, Social Communication of the Brazilian presidency. João Brandt, the secretary itself, will kick off our discussion. And we will have then, following that, a series of interventions, including Sean Shohru from the Global Digital Justice Forum, Jean Catan from the Conseil National Numérique in France, Camila Leite-Contre from the Brazilian Consumer Protection Institute. And then we will break out for some Q&A, some discussion of the first set of presentations. We will follow then with the second part, more focused on competition issues related to digital media governance. And here we'll have a series of interventions, including Maria Luisa Stasi from Article 19, Marcela Matiuzzo from VMCA Advocados, and Daria Kotova from the BRICS Competition and Policy Center. Before we start, I also need to make a disclaimer. So we are here all, and we need to acknowledge the fact that the statements expressed by members of the FGV and the guests who participate in events online represent exclusively the opinion of their authors and not necessarily the institutional position, at least of Fundação Getúlio Vargas. We also need to reiterate that everybody present here has agreed to participate spontaneously, and with this, they authorize the use of their name, voice, and image, in addition to assigning copyrights related to the exposure for this broadcast. To continue with the transmission, we ask everybody kindly to signify their agreement with this transmission by showing thumbs up. So I thank you very much for this agreement, and saying that we can start with a substantive conversation. So as I was mentioning, we have two segments, and these are related to the fact that we recognize that the promotion of diversity in the media is a solution to some of the most challenging problems when it comes to digital platforms, both from a perspective of democracy and from a perspective of economic governance and regulation. In fact, both of these topics are currently high on the agenda of the Brazilian government, and we have here a chance of giving them more visibility and broader repercussion in the context of the G20. And so without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to the first illustrious speaker that we have with us, which is the Secretary of Digital Policy and Social Communication, João Brandt. And it would be very interesting to hear from João the state of information integrity policies at the Brazilian government. And following that, we will try to connect this policy with some of the work that is being done in other countries of the G20 and create a discussion based on linkages between these contributions. So with that, João, thank you very much for your participation. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Nicolo. Thank you, FGV and the partners for the invitation. I'd like to say hello to everyone present here as panelists, but also for the audience that is with us today. I've been leading this Secretary of Digital Policy since the beginning of Lula's government in 2023, January. And of course, I would say that we had a very intense 1 year and 5 months, basically since January 8th, which is 6 days or 7 days after the beginning of the government. The topic has become hotter in terms of the presence in the public agenda, but also in terms of how to respond to the challenges brought by the way the lack of information integrity is affecting democracy in our countries. I will start, I'll divide my speech here, and I'm sorry because I can't control the sun, and the sun is just going, and I see I'm getting blurred here. But anyway, I would say that I would like to start with some conceptual challenges, and then talk about some of the domestic policies and talk about the international realm and the way we're dealing with that. We've seen the post-war, if we understand what happened in the information environment since the post-war until 2010, we will see a kind of an attempt of promoting. God, I'm really getting blurred here. Sorry, just 1 sec. I'll try to change the. I think it's a bit better now. And we've seen the attempt of promoting freedom of expression and access to information as the key part of the rights that would underpin a democratic informational environment. That was based on the promotion and the presence of journalism as the key organizer for this environment. And so we've seen that either by public service broadcasting or by private broadcasting and journalism press during this period. But basically, we were seeing journalism as supporting a key, an open environment for that. That was, of course, not. We had issues of pluralism and diversity, and we've seen that all the time. I'm here with Sean Osho-Crew, with whom I've been discussing that in the last 20-ish years. And Sean was involved in that since, I would say, I don't want to bring his age to this topic, but I mean, since the 80s, I know that he was involved in these debates. And of course, pluralism and diversity have not been totally fulfilled as values, but we were seeing these as like a professional journalism as the normative base for this debate, and pluralism and diversity as challenges, but that were, I would say, overcomeable with policies and positive policies from different states and democracies. Reliability of information or a consistency of information was a secondary issue. We were not looking at that as key because this environment that we were discussing in these, let's say, 60, 70 years since the post-war until 2010 were based on professional journalism. And this has changed. And I would say, I don't want I know that we are among specialists, and so let's just sum up that as a negative externality of a new arrangement and business model of based on business models of the social platforms. So if we understand and if we assume that as new challenges, as such as camera holders for these, let's see, okay. We will see that, of course, we have new challenges on the table. They don't change, I would say they don't change the big picture, the necessity of freedom of expression and access to information. And I would say that what we call now information integrity, and based on the expression that was affirmed by the UNDP, the UN Secretary General, OECD, that have been promoting in the last year since the pandemic. I would say that UNDP has been promoting that, and since last year, the UN Secretary General has promoted as a key expression. That is, in our view, like the collective or social dimension of freedom of expression and access to information. Of course, we can have a full discussion here about that, but we're talking about the need for production, offer, and availability of information that is reliable, consistent, and accurate. And so if we assume that as a necessity of our societies, we see what we need to go further with these agendas. So in our view, we have 6 branches. We can combine them in different perspectives, but we're talking about regulation that can help overcoming these negative externalities of the business models, of the platforms. We're talking about media literacy as an issue that has to be promoted as public policy and in massive approach for that. We're talking about sustainability of journalism and public journalism and private journalism. So as an issue that it's also, let's say, a victim or has suffering the effects of this change in of the last 10 or 15 years. We are also here promoting the idea of research and development and investments in research, development, and innovation on promoting information integrity. So just as an example, the 5 main scientific institutions or institutions of fostering scientific studies in Brazil, CNPq, CAPES, FINEP, IBICT, IPEA, for those who are Brazilian, has announced 15 days ago a combined project of launching calls and funds and promoting funds for research and development on this area. And of course, we're talking about the expansion of the public service broadcasting. So when I was talking about journalism, we have to understand also the challenges of supporting and underpinning public service broadcasting in this new arrangement, and that's something that we're also doing here, but also about the international organization and articulation for that. And that's what I'm going to spend 3 minutes, if I may, just bringing some of this perspective to you. In our view, what we had, like when we were assuming the presidency of the G20, we said, of course, disinformation, hate speech are hard topics to bring to a table where geopolitical is so clearly strong and present, and G20 is a bloc that has a different countries with different perspectives and different projects geopolitically. But on the other hand, we have clearly seen that that's a topic that affects all these countries, regardless of their political stance or political perspective. So if we understand the effects on how they create political and economic instability, leading to extremism, to violence, affecting social cohesion, how they raise questioning to the legitimacy of electoral system, or generate a crisis of trust in public institutions and the political system, the denialism relating to climate change, for instance, that really decreases the capacity of a global response to this problem, the way it affects public health issues, and we could go in a long list of issues of individual collective rights that affect those different countries. And so we propose, I would say we dare proposing this topic to the table, and we clearly had a reaction that was positive in the understanding that the topic had to be tackled. Of course, different countries have different perspectives on how to tackle, and maybe they have start from different diagnostics of that, but the topic has been in. Now we had the first 1 month ago. We had the first in-person meeting for the Digital Economy Working Group, where information integrity was taken as one of the key issues, and we had an open debate. We had a clearly a positive approach for that from the different countries, bringing their concerns, bringing their maybe with some cautious approach, but clearly bringing the topic or maintaining the topic on the table. And so basically, what I would like to reinforce, I see that my time is up here, but is we need to keep the topic on the table and trying to gather different perspectives on how to promote that while protecting freedom of expression and access to information in its usual or traditional approach as well. And so we see 3 or 4 international arena for that. One is G20 will keep the topic on the table and we'll be discussing the declaration. We had an international event on that on May the 1st, April the 30th, and May the 1st. The negotiation of the Global Digital Compact is also bringing a chapter on information integrity, and we have a second round of negotiation of the text going on in the next 15 days. And we have Melissa Fleming, the Undersecretary General for Global Communications at the UN, also promoting what they call the global principles for information integrity. And that was firstly understood as the code of conduct, but they're shifting that to global principles, where we also see an opportunity as a key moment for that. We have the UNESCO as a partner for us in this G20 debate, and with them, they have all the history of discussion, communication, information. We see them as a key player, including the way they see the multilateral possible approaches for that. And of course, we have different initiatives as the Partnership on Information and Democracy that gathers 52 countries. We have some bilateral agreements with Germany, France, United Kingdom on that. We had put that on the agenda of Mercosur, and that has approved a declaration on that. So just as an overview of how we are trying to promote that internationally and based on what. Thank you very much. I think with that, we can go for, and I'm here open to the debate after the presentations. Thank you, Nicolo.
Thank you so much, João Brandt, for bringing us the need to remind ourselves of the necessity to keep the relevance of this, the freedom of expression and access to information, and for leaving us also some clues on how to achieve this goal and to maintain this necessity. I am Mariana Lameiras. I'm sharing here this webinar together with Nicolo. I'm a senior research analyst from the United Nations University, and the name is long, so allow me to say it. It's United Nations University Operating Unit on Policy-Driven Electronic Governance. We are one of the 13 institutions under the umbrella of the United Nations University, and we are here based in Braga in Portugal. So my job here is just to facilitate the discussion, and our next esteemed speaker is a well-known person, Shan Shoshru. Let me see if I pronounced it correctly. I think I did. From the Global Digital Justice Forum. He will be presenting next and leaving us some remarks and share with us very interesting insights under the topic of this webinar. So please, Shan, go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana, for the introduction, and also João for the introduction there. I want to welcome the question posed for this event as it forefronts the goal of regulation, its ultimate objective, and that is to stimulate a plural digital and information ecosystem. This is in contrast with most regulation in recent years that, instead of aiming to achieve a vision, adopts a fire brigade approach. It tries to tackle problems of the information ecosystem only after they have appeared. This approach is understandable. It's because the ecosystem has been driven by forces beyond our control. Regulators and governments have, in effect, had little choice but to underwrite the profit maximization strategies of the digital platforms, whose services have now become so indispensable to society that they risk becoming impervious to control. Regulators have found themselves running very, very hard and still failing to catch up with the rapidly evolving sector. However, in recent times, a significant psychological shift, I believe, is apparent. The realization among the public, but also politicians, that society faces a very, very serious problem. Quite suddenly, the word regulation and regulating the platforms is no longer just whispered in back rooms. It's increasingly acknowledged as essential to addressing the challenges facing our already fragile and partial democratic structures and processes. The problem, of course, is how to do this. As Nicolo mentioned earlier, I'm part of a working group on information integrity, interoperability, and media plurality, another rather long name that we call I3MP for short. We're looking into practical solutions to this problem. To us, the challenge is not about individual bits of misinformation and disinformation circulating. It's that the entire digital information ecosystem and its dynamics have become so polluted and distorted that the very notion of truth as something we can reasonably try to achieve is under threat, to the extent that democratic processes risk being undermined. So the problem is much bigger, but also qualitatively different. It's now recognized as systemic, deeply embedded in the current structures and dynamics, and hence it demands a systemic solution that is going to embrace all the tools that can be deployed in the public interest, including those that João mentioned there, which go beyond financial, technical, business models, and of course, the subject here, policy and regulation. So for those reasons, I'm not going to actually describe existing regulatory actions, but instead, I want to look at it from the other end. What kind of digital and information space are we trying to achieve? What should regulation and policy be aiming for? What's the end goal, the vision of public policy and regulation in the digital era? And what would it look like in practice? And those words are very important, in practice. So our work group is working on the following ideas, at the core of which is, you could say, a radical decentralization of the digital media and information ecosphere. What would it look like in practice? First, we need to conceive of a single open digital platform to which everyone can log on, putting it very simply. On this will be all the current social media, digital media, community media, news feeds, TV streaming, and so on. I'm going to give it a name that we haven't used yet, the Public Digital Information Platform Infrastructure. PDI, PI for short. It's analogous to a single payment system, for instance, in Brazil, where you can simply use one method to pay for everything, built over a public infrastructure. The second feature of this vision, if you like, or practical vision, is that you will have your own personal entry point where you can compile and curate all the media and information sources and types you're interested in, including your favorite social media, news media, community media, whatever it is you want. This is your personal information portal. In a way, this is not all that different to a mobile phone or a laptop, but it's the third point here that is going to you'll begin to see a difference. All of these different media will be entirely and seamlessly interoperable. You will receive, if you choose, all your emails or WhatsApps, Twitter, Signal, Facebook, feeds, etc. on a single interface, and you'll be able to swap content between them with total ease. This is a kind of radical interoperability, and the European Union's DSA and MSA have elements of this in there, although, of course, it doesn't go that far. A fourth feature is that the algorithms of this PDI-PI, that currently algorithms prioritize content that's most profitable for the platforms, will be obliged by regulation to change. They'll have to present, first of all, your personal priorities decided by you and or your community, and secondly, ensure the public interest is not undermined. The fifth feature is that the data collected on the PDI-PI about you and your preferences will now belong to you and your community, and it'll be used and monetized if chosen only with permission and for public interest purposes, for instance, to support public interest media production. So far, so good. The above will crack open the control that major digital platforms have as gatekeepers of what we access. And indeed, to achieve this would be fantastic, but it could have negative effects unless we also look at the demand side of the equation. If we are to tackle the current information crisis, we also have to look at the supply side. Thus, the second focus of the vision is to ensure that the financial resources are available right down to local level to produce high quality public interest content, and that the content must be available, accessible, visible, and convenient for everyone to choose and see. So there's a number of features that are required here as well. First of all, financial report would be needed, especially at local and community level, to enable the production of public interest content and targeting communities and not-for-profit media and also public service media with these finances. The Global South requires special attention, including capacity building when it comes to ways of reinforcing a Southern perspective, but also epistemologies or knowledge systems from the margins that have an awful lot to offer the reductive uniformity and destructive monotony of current Western thinking. Many schemes are available at the moment, are coming on stream to do this in Australia, in Canada and France, for instance, who are diverting funds captured by the platforms back towards media, or the DSA also in the European Union enables funds from streaming services to go towards enhancing local production of media. And in countries like my own, Ireland, and in Canada, you have a lot of publicly funded activities directly going to ensure that public interest media is being prioritized. The second feature of the supply side is about ensuring visibility and accessibility. Here, regulation, which has long been used in other areas, for instance, on television, on cable television, regulation can ensure that public interest information and media content are prominently displayed on digital platforms, including smartphones, but also streaming services, television, and others. And of course, on the IPI itself, as I've called it, public interest content will be highly visible and convenient. So support to enable public interest content producers to engage effectively, especially again in the Global South, with the digital platforms are extremely important. And the third and final feature of this that I want to highlight today is that there will be a major role for intermediary curators of content, including, of course, those dedicated to public interest goals. People and communities should be able to select such curator services in the secure knowledge that their preferences will be fully respected. and that the user maintains ultimate control over their choices. So I would expect that these would many of these would emerge as non-profit user communities themselves, as well as from respected media producers. So the vision, as I've just described, and it's really in draft form, it places the user at the center of the ecosystem, offering agency and choice to individuals, groups, and communities in identifying, selecting, as well as producing their content. And this adds to diversity, enhances information integrity, and can ensure a degree of healthy serendipity in there too. Users in this vision, they can also continue the way they are. They continue with their Facebook if they like, and if they wish to continue to be exploited by the system, that's fine. The point is that a choice will be offered. So what we're arguing is that a vital first step is to fully flesh out this vision in a critically constructive and credible manner. Because unless we actually come forward with our own vision, the digital platforms will continue to largely dictate the future. So what we're saying is the public can and must take control of our vision of the future from the platforms and the tech companies. So with this in place, and I'm coming towards an end, we need to look at the technologies which can be done. We know that technically there isn't a problem here. We need to look at the business models, and then our focus here at the policies and regulations. And our working group has identified a couple of areas that we believe can act as a catalyst for wider change, a kind of fulcrum around which further measures can cluster. We argue that a key first step on the supply side is for the current main digital platforms, through mandatory legislation if needed, and it will be needed, is to open up to full interoperability among themselves. This must, of course, be done in a carefully structured and calibrated manner to avoid the pitfalls of a race to the bottom of content providers, but it would certainly include regulatory measures to reshape their business models and algorithms. And on the demand side too, matching efforts will have to be made. And here we suggest a good start is the development and support of public information and media curation intermediaries, built from the bottom up to begin to give people and communities a real choice. Our working group has produced its first paper, and you can expect to be hearing more from us soon. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean, for this inspirational words and thought-provocative vision, if I may say so, and also for bringing the emphasis to to the centricity in the user, which is also something that I'm sure will be brought up again in the next presentations. But I will immediately pass on the floor to Jean Catin, so that we do not spend much time. Jean Catin comes from the Conseil National du Numérique, and if I may, I will immediately pass the floor to him. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation, right. Please.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Maria Luisa, for putting us in touch. It's great to be here with you. I very much agree with what has been said earlier, and it's great to share these moments with people and create alliance all over the world. It's very important to us, I think. So the French Digital Council is an independent advisory body. It's a public body. So members are nominated by the Prime Minister, but they are fully independent. They are not paid by the state. The state doesn't decide what they publish or what they work on. So it's a privilege we have to work freely, I would say, in some sort, in all terms of the word. So lastly, we've worked very much on the ideas that we all share here, that we should promote a decentralized version of the internet and in a centralized world. So to do so, we've digged into some work, and Maria Luisa's thesis, for instance, which has been very important to us because it was a piece of work that could be brought to the debate in France and say, look, we can unbundle actually social networks. It's something that can be done, and it's quite important. It was quite important to me because my PhD was in telecom regulation, so unbundling was something I share. I've been sharing for a long time. And the idea is to promote the fact that big tech companies are not necessarily the one who decide of everything on social media. And this is very important because even our capacity to imagine something else is being put at harm by the big tech company. It's like we imagine that social networks can only be what is proposed to us, and this is a huge problem. And they are not even like today we see social networks as a whole, but to convey the idea that in fact it's only a sum of functionalities and not a whole, it's very important. And what we promote is the fact that today we have functionalities that are under a monopoly, in fact, occupied by the big tech companies, but in fact, each one of these functionalities can be an open market. So I guess it's something that can be discussed afterwards, but this is very important to us. It's very important when we see that Elon Musk, for instance, has only recruited like 90 people working on French moderation, for instance. Because 90 people is a very important figure, not because it's a lot of people, but because you're still an SME, a small and medium enterprise, when you employ 90 people, you know. So imagine all the SMEs that we can build in France, in fact, that could moderate or help moderating social networks and plug themselves on the social network, on the infrastructure of Twitter, and propose a better service to the public. This is very important to us because it allies, you know, the citizen aspect and the market aspect, and it's very important. But I think it's something that is going to be discussed later. And what we are seeing today also is some initiatives on the Mastodon side, on the ActivityPub side, but also on the Blue Sky side. And this is also very important to see that there are some technical proposals that actually work, and on which we can ground our discourse, our speech. This is very important to show with the phone in our hand. Look, I can choose my algorithm. This is very important. The algorithm is not something that can only be decided by Mark Zuckerberg, you know. I don't depend on Mark Zuckerberg to build my algorithm. Look, it's feasible. You didn't think of it? Look, I show you that it's feasible. This is very important. Even if there is no one on Blue Sky, we don't care. First, there is some people there, but also it's the technical aspect. To show some people that it's concrete, that it's real, it's very important. And the fact that Blue Sky is opening also the moderation aspect of the social network is very important too. That third party can moderate Blue Sky is something that we show, we see actually happening, and we promote in regulation. Unfortunately, the European Commission, and we discussed with them with Maria-Luisa, is not very open to this vision of the social network as a decentralized entity. It still sees the social network as a centralized platform. So I'm sure you all know this paper from Mike Masnick, Protocols, Not Platforms. This is very important because it gives us a vision of what social networks can be. It's not only about protocols, of course, but just to say that in this binary world in which we could oppose protocols and platforms, the European Commission is clearly on the centralized platform side. And the DSA is based on centralization after all, because it gives the platform the power to analyze its own risk and to propose its own remedy to the risk it conveys, and it identifies themselves. So this is a huge problem. And so here we are facing another vision of the world. It's a centralized vision of the world. And the role Thierry Breton is having actually goes hand in hand with this centralized vision of the platform itself. You know, it's one guy, one sheriff facing a cowboy, you know, in an Austin factory of a Tesla company, you know. So this dialogue between a man and a man, you know, it's not something that we promote either, you know. Open networks should go with open regulation, and this is also something we promote. You know, you can't have open networks without an open regulation, because to open networks, to open social networks or telecom networks, you need to bring everyone around the table. You need to bring the competitors. You need to bring the civil servants, you know, the public, etc., all the NGOs of the world, because it's these people that are going to say, hey, here I have a problem to interconnect myself with the social network. Here they are not opening the gates. Here they are imposing technical aspects that I can't fulfill, etc., etc. So you need to bring all these people around the table. And we are calling for the Commission to bring all the people around the table to implement the DSA. This would be great, and it's starting to do so. So things are moving forward, and Article 19 is also working in this direction. So it's great because things are moving forward, and that's why we can be optimistic. But I think that we can push and push even more to promote this vision of decentralized social networks. And just to pursue on what has been said, actually, because I share very much what you've said earlier, and it's great to discuss with you. When we see conversational agents, you know, being spread all over the world, I can imagine a world where, and it's actually, and it's quite sad because the first to do so are Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk again, but I can imagine a world where I have access to everything through a conversational agent, and where I can have access to social networks through a conversational agent. A conversational agent, an AI that is going to summarize what is on the social network, that will bring me the content as I want, when I want. So there is no more fear of missing out. There is no more things like that, you know, there is no infinite scrolling. We replace the attention economy by the intention economy. And this is something that can be great. Unfortunately, the only one to develop this vision are Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Elon Musk just created stories in Twitter X, and it's a functionality that summarize what there is on the social network. So it synthesizes what there is on the social networks, and it can be something very useful, actually. And Meta AI is going to do exactly the same. So what we are going to see are verticalities, you know, going one step more, you know, in an integrated version of the internet, you know, a siloed version of the internet. And it's something that can be very dangerous. We've seen some agreements between conversational agents and newspapers all over the world. So in France, it has been between Microsoft and Le Monde. So what happened next? You know, can other newspaper be used by OpenAI or not? Are they going to be or not? And Le Monde is Le Monde going to be accessible by other conversational agent? I don't know. Since I have to wrap up, I would just only say that we should promote an interconnection principle, you know, a general interconnection principle. So to make sure that everyone has access to everything. But for that, you need to have an economic regulation, technical economic regulation. And it's something we can do. It's something we know how to do. In Europe, it's something we've been doing in the telecom industry for the last 20 years. So thank you very much for your invitation. And I hope I was not too long and you can understand what I'm saying.
Great, John. This complementary perspective. It looks like a sandbox, a tool where we, a sandbox where we can pick up different tools with the idea, with the idea.
In telecom regulation, we talk about toolbox remedies.
Toolbox. I was looking for the word. Exactly. Thank you so much. So I would like to invite now Camila Leite Country to give her to leave us with her thoughts. Camila comes from is coordinator of telecommunications and digital rights at the Brazilian Institute for Consumer Protection. And I would like to give her the floor. And after Camila's presentation, we will go and check for questions in Slido and have a general question for everyone who speaks so far. Camila, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you for the invitation, Nicolo, as well. It's always a pleasure to be here talking with FGV and these experts. Since I'm the last one in this first part of the presentation, I will ask an excuse to also talk a little about competition. But in here, I will be representing both the Institute for Consumers Protection, IDAC, so showing the consumer side, and also the C20. So an explanation. IDAC is one of the co-facilitators of the G20, which is the civil society engagement group under the G20. So considering the Brazilian presidency and all of the discussions that we are having nowadays, I think it's one of the important things that we have to bring up is also the G20 discussions, as João said in the beginning as well. So in my presentation, I will have a brief introduction talking about these problems, focusing on consumers, and also bringing some concrete solutions that the C20 is planning to bring up to all of the G20 countries. So the C20 has also this role of representing the civil society voice on how to tackle these problems from bottom up. So bringing also civil society to engage on this. Let us talk a little about the context that the other panelists have also talked about. We have several discussions on platform regulation in the world. It seems a consensus that we have an issue on platforms. Platforms are very useful, but we know that the concentration is also harmful. But in general, most of the jurisdictions are focusing on tackling this problem specifically on content. And this is also an important part when we are talking about regulation. But as Sean mentioned, one thing that we have to make a focus on is the problem of platform concentration. The root of all of this problem is the concentration. So we have to think about both of this problem and both of the solution, thinking about how this environment is closed, and also, as Jean mentioned, how we should promote diversity, how we should make the internet not closed again. One of the internet principles is the decentralization, the openness, the participation, and since we had in Brazil, it has been less than a month, Net Mundial Plus 10, and in which the principles of the openness and participative internet were reaffirmed. I think it's important also to bring this when we are talking about the internet. But let's focus on platforms. And for didactic reasons, let us focus on big techs. Currently, we have a concentrated market and unregulated market in which the platforms occupy this space of power. So we see examples of extremeness, such as one of the platform leaders challenging platform owners, challenging the sovereignty of a country, as Twitter, as it happened on Twitter in Brazil. We see a concentration that is harmful in terms of how the content is disseminated, how consumers use these platforms, how we lack alternatives. So this is, I'm trying to bring a little about the Brazilian context, but this is a general problem. And this perpetuates a cycle of concentration, of user being locked down on platforms that they don't see alternatives, and lack of alternative. Consumers don't see alternatives. And we know that by definition, digital markets tends to concentration, but for now, all of the enforcers were unable to adapt their current regulation to tackle these issues. So what can we do? What measures can we take to tackle these problems? In a competition point of view, we have to promote a leveling playing field. In the consumer point of view, we have to bring alternatives and stop the abuses that these platforms are making to the consumers. In the point of view of dissemination of knowledge and information, we have to promote information integrity, reliable information, and alternative and different alternatives of sources of information. And we also have to think not only this as a problem of market, this is also a problem of democracy, how citizens are being informed, how citizens are using platforms. So this is also a democracy problem and a fundamental rights problem. since Sean mentioned the problems on the demand and supply, I think it's important also to highlight then that this also relates to a human rights issue. But how can we actively fight against that? Or not only bringing the negative side of fighting against something, but promoting an open internet, promoting reliable information. So concretely, and then now in this moment, I will specifically talk about the discussions that are being held in the C20. The civil society are bringing 3 alternatives for this market regulation point of view. Let us frame in this way, which is the unbundling, especially of creation and hosting content, as Sean mentioned, and I think that Isa Stasi will also develop this. Interoperability of course, in a data protected way to promote diversity of players, of business models, and also thinking how this can promote reliable information and also open access platforms, open access alternatives. So this also relates to different business models. How the C20 intends to bring this? So we are doing an advocacy work to make the governments understand the holistic approach that we have to have in these issues, how these concentrations is being harmful in all of the senses that were formally mentioned, in the lack of alternatives, in how consumers suffer, in how the democracy and fundamental rights suffer. So we are bringing an approach, and that I will ask an excuse to read for you as we approach this. So G20 countries must develop measures to tackle power imbalances between digital platforms and its users, both considering business users, content producers, media, and especially consumers and users, in order to fight market concentration dynamics and as means to push for a thriving digital platforms ecosystem and users' empowerment. These measures must include, but are not limited to, the promotion of independent and plural media, open knowledge and open access platforms, and the incentive of data-protected interoperability measures. We have seen lots of synergies on what has been already mentioned, but we have to go further. And diversity, I think it was a correct word that was put in this panel. Diversity is key for a fruitful digital environment. Diversity of platforms, diversity of information sources, of alternative to consumers, and also of stakeholders participating. So that's why I'm focusing so much on civil society work in promoting that. We are in a key moment that we are discussing a lot these issues, but we have to change the key and bring the solutions, the concrete solutions, both in terms of these international discussions and also internal regulations in the different jurisdictions, considering their specificities, of course. We have to protect the user's vulnerability. We have to balance this with the promotion of fundamental rights and the protection of democracy. But we have to do this in a participatory way. So thank you for framing this in a different and in a positive way to discuss diversity in platforms, and I'm happy to discuss this further with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camila. We now can consider this first part of our webinar somehow closed, but of course we will still have presentations in the second part, so please do not leave us. Now I would like to check Slido to see if we have any questions from the audience. I think we do not have any, right, Nicolo?
No,
okay. So we have the confirmation, and since we do not have any questions on Slido yet, we would like to ask all of you who presented so far, if you would like to leave us some insights on the challenges that you have been facing when studying these issues. I suggest that we go one by one and give the floor to every one of you, starting with João, since he presented first, and then we follow the same order if you agree, okay?
Thank you, Mariana. I'll just bring a brief comment. I think it's the approach that Sean and Jean and Camila presented really interesting and really go beyond what's the I would say the common sense on discussing regulatory approaches for the issue. What I found challenging is that sometimes, and I would like to bring that as a topic here, when we call about interoperability and leaving new mechanisms of, like, let's say, curatorship for content that goes unbundled on digital platforms, that may also have a negative externality of reinforcing, let's say, filter bubbles or the lack of a common understanding of what's happening among us. So in some sense, I would like to hear from them on that. I mean, how we can go for promoting these kind of approaches, but not opening a space for a bigger, let's say, fragmentation of the public debate, what in my view really affects negatively our capacity as societies of reading the reality and finding a common approaches to act upon them.
Sean, would you like to comment on this and also on the challenges?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, João has put his finger on one of the key challenges that we have certainly in the working group, because there is a real danger that if you do open up to interoperability, and in a sense, it's not just filter bubbles where you do actually get more reinforcement of singular views, if you like, because people are selecting only their own, or even the Wild West, where if you open it up totally, that anybody can get in with any views. I think a trite response, but it has a degree of truth, is that I certainly wouldn't be arguing what I'm arguing for if I didn't believe at some level that if people are actually given the tools that will enable them to do the decent thing and the interesting and the stimulating thing, they will actually do it once they have the tools. However, it's too simple, because we also know that people are very open. All of us are very open to manipulation. So that's why I suppose that I had to emphasize not just the demand side, but also the supply side, and how carefully that really has to be dealt with. And actually, in some ways, regulating the platforms, although politically extremely difficult, can actually is not technically all that difficult. In a way, we know what they're doing wrong. The question is how we can define what they should be doing right on that side. And it's even more difficult than the problem that João was pointing to, which is on the supply side of how you can actually ensure that new content that is being produced can genuinely get there. And that it will be public interest content, and that it will be available to people, and that people will select it. And this is why we thought the idea of these curator intermediaries that would be public interest driven, would be in many cases non-profit, and would actually be communities themselves, would be aware of these problems, and to give concrete support at that level might be one way of getting around it. There's no simple solutions. If there were, we would have landed on them long ago. The solution is going to be quite complex, and our working group has recognized that by bringing together people who know about the business models, as well as the technologies, as well as the old style activists like myself, as well as the legal people and regulatory and so on. We're bringing them together. We have them together in a working group that will put together, hopefully, a package that can step by step. I mean, you have to take things step by step, so that if there's a problem, it's recognized and you can tackle it fairly quickly on your road. I did want to mention one other point that Jean raised there, that we can, if you like, control that the algorithms can work for us. And one of the challenges that we always face is that we're just told that these things are too complex, people can't understand AI, no way we can't understand it. In fact, you can have AI systems quite easily, without too much work, working for you, doing what you want them to do. And there are, in fact, on our working group is somebody who does that kind of thing and develops that bottom-up AI model. So the idea of AI at the margins, for instance, is a very, very interesting one. So one of the problems that we do face in bringing about change is that the illusion that is developed and promoted by the platforms that these things are too big to understand, too big for us to do anything about. People have created them. We have the capacity to actually create, to take control of them and to make them work for us right from the bottom up. So I'd better leave it there.
Sure, John. Sure, you can go ahead. You are muted. We cannot hear you.
He's not muted. He does
Yeah,
an issue with the computer.
No, I was
Okay.
muted on my computer. I'm really sorry for that. So yeah, I very much share what has just been said, and in fact, it's one of the biggest challenge, of course. But we have solution. I think we have many solutions. When you go on a music website, for instance, like Spotify or Deezer, you have many proposals that are made to you according to your preferences, of course, but other proposals that are not made according to your preferences. And it's important to think this non-discriminatory interface where you can have access to alternatives to your own favorite algorithm. This is a new kind of pluralism we have to invent, actually. So it's true, we don't have all the answers, but it's a democratic challenge, and it's a democratic challenge to redefine pluralism. This is very important. And we know very well in law and digital law and European law, the FRIEND principle, the fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory principle. And it should be applied to algorithm choice and algorithmic choice. And also another alternative is something that has been promoted by the Panopticon Foundation, the People vs. Big Tech Consortium, etc. It's the intention panel. Once every now and then, you can have your interface asking you whether you are or not you want to have a look at another bubble, you know, because today actually I'm in a bubble, but when I buy my newspaper, I'm in a bubble. And nobody asked me whether or not I want to buy another newspaper, you know, the far right newspaper, for instance. And I could learn something actually by going and reading the far right newspaper. And if the algorithm, if the social networks proposes me, you know, from time to time, you know, to see what other bubble look like, maybe we can breach this bubble that I'm into, and you know, rediscover the notion of pluralism, you know, by changing a bubble from one time to another. So just to say shortly, we have many things to invent, but we have many, you know, concepts that can be used and redefined also to reinvent, you know, our democratic environment. And I think we can achieve that goal.
Camila, do you face similar challenges, or you would like to bring another perspective from the civil society side, or as you wish?
Thank you. I would like to quickly complement the answer to João and then add two more challenges. The first thing is that, of course, we don't have a perfect solution, but I think that we have to see this on the other side. If we keep on doing the same thing that we are doing, I think the harm is even bigger. So we have to develop more this concrete solution, but I think that we are arriving to this place. And one key to this, not to reinforce bubbles, is one thing that, for example, Secon is already doing, focusing on media literacy. So if we are empowering consumers with alternatives, we have to empower them how to make informed choices. So I think this is one important complement to the possibility of interoperability and to bring these alternatives. But bringing additional challenges, I think that one challenge that civil society faces is how to approach this For example, in the G20, considering different contexts and also considering different technical regulatory perspectives. So when we are talking about platform regulation, we are talking about different fields of law, of social sciences, of technical perspectives, and we have to bring all of this knowledge and expertise to have a common solution. How can we do this? So this is the first thing, regulatory silos and how to tackle this. And these regulatory silos sometimes have as an assumption that we are only talking about the market. We're not just talking about the market. We are talking about the democracy, about fundamental rights. So we have to not only talk about technicalities, we have also to talk about how people suffer in practice with this. And just to end, sometimes we are thinking about a perfect solution of regulatory approach, but we also have to think about the different contexts of countries. We have seen this in Brazil, for example. So it's a challenge also on how we can adapt on different contexts.
Great. We have a set of challenges well identified here, but I think it's time, and Nicola will probably agree with me, it's time for us to move on. So I would like to ask Nico to step in, Nicola to step in now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Yes, it's time to move into the competition segment. Indeed, I want to make a connection between these two segments because I think these talks were very inspiring in pinpointing some of the problems, and they raise also potentially some competition questions. On the other hand, so while I was listening to the talks, I was setting aside one challenge for each of these speeches that I think takes us into the second segment, but to which I invite basically everybody to contribute maybe in the final part of the discussion, which is, well, for example, in the case of João, we heard about the importance of freedom of expression and access to information as a collective right of societies. And so one can ask, how does this inform policies about media pluralism, and should this create any limits, for instance, in competition law against personalization, extreme personalization by certain companies, which is something that he also mentioned in his remarks, or should we leave this to media literacy by asking people to be more considerate about the interests of society when they're making use of digital media? Similar, when I was listening to Sean, he was referring to solutions that had to do with data aggregation services and curation services. And one wonders there whether it is possible to simply rely on the market for providing these solutions, or we would rather need a digital public infrastructure similar to PICS, as he referred to, in order to avoid concentration. Also, on the side of curator services, it will be interesting to see how it interacts with professional services of journalism. So how these two categories of professional operate, how we should train these, or how they should be regulated, and what ensures that these rules and this association do not become vehicles of exclusion from an economic perspective. Then moving to Jean, I really like the idea of from attention to intention economy, and here basically I see that what he means is that there should be agency, transparency and agency, which is what often is called in competition terms consumer sovereignty. So the consumer deciding the type of services and content that he receives. However, for this to happen, we need to intervene at multiple levels. It is not enough, as it was pointed also earlier in other interventions, to say we need interoperability. We need basically different parties of the ecosystem to cooperate in a dynamic manner, given that they're facing a complex ecosystem. And for this, maybe the traditional instruments are not enough. You need to have a more dialogic process. And so, for example, there is increasingly a solution that is being adopted of drafting codes of conduct that can be more malleable and flexible, but they also might have different rules, different obligations for different types of parties. So one of the challenges is how to create this code of conduct and not by creating code of conduct that are very difficult to comply with for certain parties, raise barrier to entry, and lead to further concentration. So again, another point to show the connection between the two. And finally, when it comes to Camilla's intervention, I was listening to these ideas of ensuring pluralism also by creating unbundling. And again, this raises the question of whether concentration can happen at another level if you separate, hosting and moderation. What tools would we have to tackle possible concentration in moderation, and whether competition law is sufficient or we need complementary measures? So all this to show that the economic regulation and competition part is present in all this discussion and cannot be neglected. So now let me move on to the more competition focused part. Also mentioning to you that this is a part of an initiative that we launched last week, which we call Competition Week. It's up on the website of FGV, and it's aimed to stimulate a series of discussion on competition law in digital markets. And here we have invited some key partners in that regard. So in addition to the UN University with Mariana, Camilla from IDEC, this initiative here of the webinar is in partnership with Consumers International and with the T20. Here, I think the first person that can connect very well the two discussions that we have been having and who has already been called to respond to some of these challenges in the previous interventions is Maria Luisa Stadi, who is a digital rights director at Article 19, which, as the title says, it does very important work on freedom of expression, as embodied by Article 19 of the UN Charter, but also human rights more generally, and is an important partner in our discussions on competition and human rights, with a specific focus also on Latin America, where they have several colleagues operating in Brazil and Mexico. So with that, I leave the floor to Maria Luisa. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak in our webinar.
Thank you, Niccolo. Very flattered by this introduction, and thank you for to you all for the I agree, they're very inspiring contributions so far. In fact, it's going to be difficult to inspire as much as you did, building on top of your shoulders, but I'll give it a try. Luckily, we can try to sort of shift a little bit the focus, which means we can try to talk about the same issues, but put in some different lenses so that we can widen the perspective and possibly bring in a few more ideas that can also bring in different stakeholders, such as national competition authorities, not only the media authorities, or other stakeholders in the public debate, like, for example, third-party players, potential competitors, and so on and so forth. Because I do agree that if one thing is certain is that this is it's very much about having a public debate on fundamental building blocks of our democracies. And so the more we can enlarge the variety of stakeholders that participate, the more informed, I would say, the sounder our solutions could be. There have been already loads of concepts and ideas and arguments that have been put forward. And you'll see I'm going to definitely mention those, just put them in a slightly different narrative, also explaining why and how it happens that a competition lawyer by background like me, and also an academic that focuses on pro-competitive solutions for digital markets, ends up working for a free speech organization. So that, I think, is a clear reflection of why, the whys and hows. So when I was told about this webinar, apart from being very happy to become part of this crew, I thought, okay, the main topics are platform regulation and governance. And I think possibly the first thing that I usually stress as a premise is that I do genuinely believe that every time we talk about platform regulation, we're talking about at least two major components. So the first one is we need, if we want to protect free expression and all the fundamental rights, we need human rights-oriented rules about how specific services are offered in the market. And we've mentioned a few, curation services, but we also mentioned another set of services that are offered by digital platforms. And obviously, there is merit, and it's fundamental to say the bottom line needs to be that terms and conditions for the offering of these services, they need to be compliant with human rights standards. And this is a part of it. The other part is that the reality is that these services are not offered in the vacuum. They're offered in markets, digital markets, most of it, if not all of it, at least those that we're talking about today. And so the main point is, what are the power dynamics in those markets? Who controls those markets? Who has power on those markets? Because this will definitely and certainly impact on how the services are offered, but also which services are offered and which are not offered, which are streamlined, which are, never get to the market, and so on and so forth. So power dynamics, basically, in a nutshell, is the other component when we do shape or think about what kind of platform regulation we want to have, and also what kind of digital information ecosystem, as shown, as defined it, as referred to it, we want to have. These two components, they're not alternative. They're absolutely complementary. They need to go hand in hand, and they need to reinforce each other, apart from being, not conflicting, but creating synergies. The power dynamics, so basically when we use competition law is the majority of people, they associate competition law with market power. I have to say, when we talk about the power dynamics in the digital information ecosystem, we're not referring only to the traditional market power concept, but we're referring about, and by we, I mean also a lot of researchers, and there are clear evidence about what these researchers argue. We're talking about a situation where there are some big players that they can actually regulate the market. The terms and conditions that they offer when they offer services, they become the market standard. They become an industry standard. So this is a form of regulatory market, and in specific environments like the information ecosystem, there have been scholars that demonstrated and argued that we're talking about opinion power as well. So a specific form that goes beyond the regulatory power. And it's basically the platform ability to influence individual and public opinion. So we're talking about an individual level, but also community, societal level. The individual and public opinion formation within the ecosystem. So this is a strong link in between the competition approach, so we deal with power, and the media approach. We need to create diversity, guarantee diversity, plurality, et cetera, but also human rights and democracy, because those are building blocks of a functioning democracy. So the link is there, I think is pretty clear. Now, there are specific cases where this is more evident, and we've mentioned recommender system. Just let me simply describe a similar, another entry point for this argument to appear on the point. So studies demonstrate that in many areas of the world, at least 50% of the citizenry, so the people, they do get access to their information via social media. So the kind of information we access or we don't access, the kind of information is given more visibility or less visibility on our feeds, depends on a handful of recommender systems. So obviously, we're talking about a clear impact on the opinion, the formation of the opinion of individuals, collectivities, on the public discourse, and so on and so forth. And obviously, the way power is held on these markets is instrumental to achieve public goals. So the point is, though, how do we openly discuss about this overlap and synergies rather than having a fragmented in silos approach? Because I've been, as a human rights defender, I've been discussing with the competition communities many times and saying we have a problem that has to do with power over some markets, but is instrumental to the achievement of other public objectives. And I've been told, we're not sure this is the right table for you to come and raise these arguments, right? I do believe that the situation is changing. I do believe that there is much more awareness about the overlaps and interplays of these arguments. I still believe, as has been said already, that this is the beginning of the discussion, that there is no one-stop-shop solution, that we need to sort of keep going down this line and bring in different expertise. We need the legal, the technical, the economic, et cetera, et cetera. But there are already some specific points that I think we can reasonably say we don't have doubts on this. So apart from these clear overlaps, I would say that there are some specific markets that have been closed so far to competition. We've mentioned bundling and unbundling a number of times. So let me say this in different words. What is the problem with some big players offering a bundle of services? If you think about it as users, what basically we do, we just need one click and we get a number of things rather than just one by one, right? In theory, that sounds good, but in practice, the point is that some of these services are key for a number of public goals or public objectives. And some of these services are key for our internet experience and our agency as people, individuals, users, consumers. We can decide which term we want to use, but this is what we're talking about. So a bundle limits massively our possibility, locks us into that specific package that has been designed and shaped not to serve us best, but to serve best the business interest of a company. So this is why we need to carefully scrutinize those bundles, and we need to carefully decide what are the markets that need to be open to competition. What are the markets where we must have plurality and diversity in order to guarantee all the public goals? And as Jean mentioned, bundling has been a typical remedy in the telecom industry, has been a typical remedy in other industries. There is no competition authority over the world that is not familiar with this. So we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just using this strategically. And just let me say about a specific thing about this. Unbundling can be one remedy. We've mentioned, well, you have mentioned, thank you. You've mentioned already also interoperability, which is a technical way to realize unbundling, but it can also be a sort of a standalone remedy. There have been other possibilities mentioned, like look at Blue Sky, look at other alternative players, support those alternative, try a way to support alternative voices. Sean was mentioning sustainability of media. So if we focus on recommend the system again, if we open the market and we try to support the plurality, I couldn't exclude, and this has been part of my research, I've discussed this with a number of stakeholders, that at some point we realize that we need public support or bottom-up support to what we can call a sort of a public interest algorithm. So if we open the market and we get in a number of players, but none of them offer a service that is specifically tailored on the specific public goal that we want to achieve, we're not naive. We can say, okay, maybe the market doesn't deliver this specific outcome by itself, then we need support. This has been done in the past, especially in the media sector. It has been done in the education sector and so on and so forth. So once again, not reinventing the wheel, just trying to link some dots. Another right concern was about what do we do if we open the environment and we give more agency to people, but then they go into their filtered bubble. And media literacy has been mentioned already. So the point that I just want to make here is that I very much liked what Sean said, bringing this to the traditional media environment. Sorry, Jean. And he said, nobody will ever force me to read 3 different newspapers. If I want, I can stick to one and never read the others. I think it's a similar environment. So what the state needs to do is to create the condition for a plurality of voices to be out there, and then possibly support and stimulate through digital literacy and other specific policies the creation of incentives for the people to go and use different instruments and go and get access to different voices and pieces of content, but they cannot dictate the information diet of each and every individuals, because this is, I would argue, this is way too paternalistic for a democracy. So Remedies, yes, many remedies can be put together. We can create a specific combination based on the specific context. I don't think that there is one specific package of remedies that will work for each and every state everywhere. It really depends on the economic condition, the social condition, the political condition, the level of digital literacy, et cetera, et cetera. So I would strongly argue for discussing with the relevant stakeholders, flexible, malleable, as Nicola was saying about the code of conduct, similar things, flexible, malleable solutions that can be tailored on national or local level, while taking absolutely due account of the fact that we're talking about global businesses and we're talking about fundamental rights that should guaranteed in the same way everywhere. So there will be the need for discussing, as Joao was driving us through, all this wonderful initiative at international level to create consensus, build consensus, and work on a common and joint vision of where we want to go, what we want to achieve, and so on and so forth. Sorry if this has been extremely high level, but I really want to add just one point before we go on, and I'm happy to say, discuss and elaborate specific cases afterwards and get into the details. Sean was nudging us to think about what are the goals, what are the values, et cetera, et cetera. I do believe that when we think about a regulatory approach, regulatory intervention, we need to figure out if what we want to do is to fix some market problems, or if we want to be a little bit more ambitious and reshape markets in a way that we think it could better serve society and economy. And I think that in the past decades, we've been very shy in taking stand on the second approach and saying, in a democracy, we can have an open and democratic discussion about how we want to shape our markets, how we want to shape our information ecosystem, rather than just limiting ourselves on fixing here and there the major problems, but maintaining the status quo just for the sake of it. And I think competition can be one of the most powerful tools once we have the discussion to sort of lead us where we want to be. I'm conscious about time, so I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Isa, for pointing out that competition intervention needs to go in conjunction with the vision about what to do with the remedies, the importance of the remedies, and also the importance of encouraging and maybe subsidizing different kinds of business models. I think this is indeed much needed discussion. We will see exactly about these points also right now. What is the status of intervention in digital markets in Eastern Europe? From our colleague Daria Kotova from the BRICS Competition Center, another center which has done a lot of work with us and hosts every year the BRICS Plus Digital Competition Forum in Rio de Janeiro in November, and about the developments in that region, which can be very instructive when thinking about intervention in digital markets. So Daria, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you everyone, and thank you, Nicola, for inviting me to talk about this topic that has it's kind of rising its head in the competition law debate. Well, let me share my slides. I have some slides, but I think they're too long for this discussion anyway. Please stop me if I start to talk too much. So Nicole asked me to focus a little bit also on the issue of diversity in general, on the issue of diversity as a value and as an idea for competition law debate. And for the sake of time, I will just briefly pinpoint some basic ideas. So when I'm talking and what I think we should be thinking of when talking about diversity in competition law is we should aim to not define diversity as merely a quantitative parameter of how markets function. So it's not only about the amount of competitors that kind of helps the competition authorities, to decrease their concentration ratio when they're calculating it, but also about the quality of that diversity, right? who owns the firms, the competitors, what kind of goods, how different, how heterogeneous are the goods that the competitors offer, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a whole, like a separate interesting topic to discuss what can be these parameters of diversity as applied to competition law analysis. Another important point is, while diversity is more or less a maxim now in, for competition law debate, we have recognized its importance. Its relationship to efficiency of how the markets are functioning is a little bit obscure, and one still has really to learn how much of competition is actually good competition. And I'm referring here to this quite famous diversity/stability debate that's been taking place in, in complexity science and in complexity economics, because the competition authorities and, the public in general and the regulator in general is still to specify exactly where this equilibrium exists between too much competition that can actually be sometimes harmful, right? And too efficient markets that are like delivering the low price the consumers, as we are used to think need, but then they lack any qualitative diversity, anything valuable, and they do not actually produce anything valuable. So talking about diversity in the digital realm, why is it a good tool, especially for markets with high level of complexity and uncertainty, is actually referred by Joseph Farrell in his short 2006 essay on diversity is one value of competition. Is, well, first of all, it reduces the burden of certainty for the firms themselves, because the more diverse offer you have in the market, the easier it is for firms, for suppliers of content to actually serve all consumer preferences that are not rational, as we know, right? It promotes sustainable innovation. It promotes more equality. For instance, diversity of ownership is perhaps one of the brightest examples. Of course, it promotes media pluralism and diversity, and it potentially increases resilience of the market structure, which is again a separate question that I'm not going to stop here. An important thing also when talking about diversity is keeping in mind that competition law has this, how Eleanor Fox really nicely put it, competition law's power dispersing role, meaning that competition law basically serves to, get rid of this concentrated market by creating more nodes in this system that have some degree of market power, or they don't have any degree of market power, but they still serve a particular niche of consumers and actually serve quite well. So this means that through this diversity debate, we can also emphasize this competition's law political meaning that is not actually bad. And well, I'm a firm advocate of that competition law can be used and should be used as a political tool and policy tool as well. So just a couple of recent examples of a debate. Well, these are not coming from this part of the world, but I think they're important to mention to kind of underscore again that diversity is becoming more and more important for the debate among competition lawyers. So, well, they're not talking that much yet of diversity of content that is being delivered by competition by digital markets. But if you have any examples when the competition authorities actually focused on this, kind of diversity of content and what is being delivered to the consumer, well, please let me know, because I'm still looking for examples. Much more pronounced now in the competition debate is the diversity of business structure and diversified business structure and the diversity of business models that are offered by the market. A very recent example is of how a regulator is actually taking up diversity and using it as a sword is the Competition Market Authority's recent AI principles they have been published in their recent 2024 AI Foundation Models market study, where they actually put diversity as one of the key principles of the new forming emerging artificial intelligence market, saying that sustained diversity of business models and model type is what the regulator should be, well, both regulator and the business community should be aiming for. Saying also that the market sustains a range of business models, meaning that the market is quite open to host a lot of different diverse modes of production, modes of partnership, etc., etc. It's not only, 3 or 4 incumbent companies who have been quite efficient in working on these artificial intelligence models and bringing them to the people. No, it's not the case. The market can actually host way more. And you can see this nice picture taken from this market study that actually shows that this hugely and fastly developing market is connected all of these independent developers are actually in that way or another connected to just a handful of firms that we already know. So the market is not even there yet. Well, maybe, I mean, we can have a discussion about it, but these firms are already present and they have already concentrated all these nodes of, independent, diverse developers all around them, which is quite bad. Another example, a little bit less recent, but still it's a nice, touch on diversity in competition law, was mentioned at the FTC 2022 listening forum on media mergers, where Commissioner Lena Hahn said that several incumbents now control the entire supply chain of content creation. So this also brings to this discussion on value chain and how concentrated and bottlenecked they are. We have been used to having this discussion in industrial value chains. Now it seems that we also have to look at the entire value chains in the media market, as we have now these incumbent companies that are present at each node. Well, think about Amazon Studios that actually produces content and it delivers content. And it's one long proprietary supply chain. What also was noted is also very interesting is biopower concerns with regards to streaming services. While some famous musicians like, take Taylor Swift, might not have problems negotiating contract terms with Spotify or Apple Music, some niche musicians actually might have. There was a subject of a parliamentary investigation in the United Kingdom back in a couple of years ago. They hinted that could be a competition law problem, but no action was taken, well, not that I know of. Also, innovation diversity, this is something that we have already been trying to, investigate. Famously in several mergers decisions in agriculture, well, we all know about them, the Dow DuPont and Bayer Monsanto. But why hasn't this been brought up in digital cases like the Meta Giphy, the Microsoft Activision recent merger? Well, this is also places to experiment and to think about diversity. This actually is even closer to, people's minds. That's something that is happening in seeds innovation, for instance. So coming now to this part of the world, as promised. So I want to stop a little bit on the Russian experience. Of course, I know that diversity does not seem to be a policy priority in Russia now. Anyway, we were talking about competition law here. So, what's interesting about the Russian example, apart from the case that I hope to briefly describe, is that the market structure here in the digital media market, social media market, news media, digital news market is actually quite concentrated, because we have several large digital ecosystems that act as gatekeepers of content. That's first observation. The second observation is that the market structure as of now has been changed forcibly for the sake of political goals. Basically, you had the government blocking several social media players that were actually competing with the national champions, like Meta services, like TikTok, although it's Chinese, has nothing to do with the West. But interestingly, the open niches were not filled with independent services. So what happened? The market became even more concentrated. Yes, you had the presence of large Western companies that are infamous in the West for breaking all kinds of competition rules. But now you have the national champions actually doing the same thing with the niches in the market that have been, open after the after the involuntary exit of these incumbent companies. Another example, is the YouTube example. It might be easier for a state like this, if we're talking also about freedom of expression, to press, big incumbents for whom this market is important, because Russia is an important market for YouTube. So pressing YouTube, to make it turn on the censorship machine in Russia has been quite easy for the Russian government. Could have been less easier for if we had a more diverse set of competitors. Well, that's just my random thought. Anyway, it shows also this interplay between competition, market structure, and concentration, and political power. An interesting case that we have, and I hope I'm not running out of time because I forgot to turn on my timer. I'm not running
wrap up in about 30 seconds. That would be great, so we can have.
Okay, I will just briefly tell about this case. It was an interesting case so we have this big digital company Yandex that also has. It has a search, it has a variety of other services, it's an ecosystem. So they were forced basically by the state in 2022 to sell its news aggregator, Yandex News, that it actually was one is the most important sources for an average Russian to get their daily portion of news. And their blogging services then. The merger was cleared. Unfortunately, of course, the competition authority didn't have a chance to work on this merger, but in a different setting, the merger would have raised very interesting questions about algorithmic manipulation in the presence of two quite big companies, because the buyer also is a huge ecosystem focusing on social media. It would also raise interesting questions about the integration of news and search news and social media into a huger ecosystem that already has huge market power and political power. Well, I can, talk about that case maybe later at some point. But this is just an example of how this issue of concentration, of how this issue of merger control merger control used as a measure against concentration should really be emphasized also with respect to protecting diversity. So talking about the development, again, just a couple of, touches on this. In the region, well, in Uzbekistan, maybe it's a little bit less kind of pronounced, even though this jurisdiction is starting also to work on their digital laws. And what I think is important here is to help raise awareness in these jurisdictions that competition in the digital markets is not only about e-commerce, or self-preferencing kind of cases. It's also about protecting essential public interests, especially in jurisdictions, in politically vulnerable jurisdictions like this. In Kazakhstan, though, there was a very interesting development. In one case, even though it was related to the ride-hailing market, anyway, I will still mention it. Was the first case in this region where the competition authority actually upheld the instrument of algorithmic auditing and making the digital company an incumbent company to open up their algorithms to ensure price transparency. If we can do this in the ride-hailing market in jurisdictions like this, we can easily do this in markets related to digital and social media. So this is an interesting case to follow, and it's interesting how this is going to, what result this will bring. Although we also have to remember that in these jurisdictions, we also have this resource kind of restrictions that is actually making it quite hard for these authorities, for these jurisdictions to cope with cases where algorithms are at stake. And very finally, and I'm wrapping up, just some thoughts on the way forward. Yes, the BRICS totally is a great start to promote diversity as a public interest, because we have these emerging national markets. They are bustling. We have lots of national competitors that we can also bring into the discussion. I think we also need to emphasize algorithmic governance and thinking of regimes on national or maybe regional regimes for algorithmic governance, much like in the EU DSA case. We also have to address, this is especially important for post-Soviet economies and kind of authoritarian-like economies, to address the diversity of ownership and diversity of business models that will have to boost national competitiveness, and also to address the weak bargaining positions of many of the BRICS jurisdictions vis-a-vis the global content providers, where cooperation can also be one thing to think about. And finally, proposing diversity and inclusion as a topic of interest for forums like, for instance, the UNCTAD, International Group of Experts in Competition Law, could also be an option, given UNCTAD's prominent role in addressing the developing countries' needs. And also, it's important to to use this forum to raise awareness of topics like this that have been still underexplored, largely due to the tight tenets, mainstream Chicago focused competition law that we have been having recently. Well, thank you very much. And I'm really sorry for...
Thank you, Daria. No, it was fascinating. I indulged a little bit with the time because it was so interesting to hear about cases. And thank you for making the connection between UNCTAD and UN and the G20. I think the UNCTAD forum is a very relevant place of engagement, especially for developing countries. So now, without further ado, hopefully to leave a few minutes of final remarks from everybody. First, I want to, last but not least, pass the floor to Marcela Matiuso, who's a partner at VMCA Advogados and also coordinator on digital markets at IBRAC, who has been doing a lot on this front. So, Marcela, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolo, and apologies in advance to everyone because I am a little sick, so I might cough. And I mean, just overall, if it's hard to understand, let me know. I'll do my best. So what I wanted to briefly cover was a little bit of the Brazilian experience with competition, and the discussion that is happening in Brazil right now on whether the existing mechanisms for the Brazilian, that we call the Brazilian competition defense system, are sufficient to deal with the challenges that stem from digital platforms. So I think it's important to know that Brazil has been discussing competition in digital markets for a while now. So there's a body of cases at the Brazilian Competition Authority. There's studies on the topic. Brazil was very active also on the BRICS efforts to study digital markets, which led to a document that was drafted by all of the countries from the BRICS on that front. As I mentioned, there are cases at the Competition Authority. Interesting to note that some of these cases, some of the most notorious cases in Brazil, are not necessarily cases focused on the big tech companies. So though we did have like a Google shopping sort of investigation in Brazil, the most recent examples of enforcement action are focused, for example, on food delivery markets and on companies that are particular to Brazil, such as iFood, that are not necessarily the same that we see in other jurisdictions. And what has been happening, as I mentioned, is an initial debate as to whether this existing framework of competition law is sufficient to tackle the challenges brought about by digital platforms. And of course, as everyone knows, this discussion is not specific to Brazil, and other jurisdictions have already, come up to their own solutions for this issue. But what I believe is important to Brazil specifically, but also for other global South countries, is to discuss, if we understand that indeed the framework is not sufficient, how exactly are we going to, establish new tools? What those tools will be, how they will be implemented, to what extent they will apply, etc. And that is exactly the discussion that is happening in Brazil right now. It started actually at the very end of 2022, when we had the first bill of law. For reference, for those interested, it's 2768, the number of the bill of law, which aimed at very, establishing a framework that some people have been calling the Brazilian DMA. But the similarities kind of end in the point that it establishes a model for ex-ante rules for competition. It's very, very different in that the bill of law, the bill of law that exists in Brazil, does not establish concretely, as the DMA does, what the specific obligations would be for companies and what exactly would be prohibited from those companies. The criteria for defining gatekeepers, or whatever we want to call, those platforms that would fall under the legislation, are also very different. And more importantly, perhaps, what this proposal did was establish that the National Telecommunications Agency would become the digital regulator and would thus become in charge of, establishing what the specific obligations for these digital platforms would be ex post. So the law would basically say, okay, there are these principles. Competition law is not sufficient in the way that we see it. We're establishing a regulator, and this regulator will kind of look at the market and say later on what the obligations for digital platforms need to be. And what we understand by digital platforms is this. The bill was severely criticized for a bunch of reasons. Perhaps the main reason was that the criteria for establishing gatekeepers was very low, in the sense that several companies would fall under the criteria, and it wasn't exactly clear what the goal of that would be, and whether it would be good or it would be bad, if it would lead to a very large number of players being included, which then could, hinder enforcement of the rules itself. And there was also a gigantic debate, as you can imagine, on the institutional authority, right? So should that be the telecommunications agency? Why? What would qualify the agency to do that job, especially given that the mandate was so broad. So it's like, you guys have to establish what the rules will be from now on. So go ahead, do it, and then we'll know about it later on. So through 2023, after the bill was proposed, Congress carried out a series of hearings, focusing on better understanding a little bit what the feel of the market was, so companies, but also academics, so civil society, and importantly, government, right? So the telecommunications agency, but also other authorities such as the competition authority. And that ended at the end of 2023. The Ministry of Finance, more specifically through a Secretariat of Economic Reform, released a public consultation, trying to better assess and better organize this discussion, again, focusing on these same questions. So whether the regime for competition is sufficient, if not, what needs to change in regard to conduct, what needs to change in regard to mergers, focusing on competition, what the authority would look like if we were to talk about an ex-ante model. What exactly would this ex-ante model look like? Would it apply? Would it be symmetric? Would it be asymmetric? And so forth. This consultation just closed. I mean, just wouldn't be precise, but it closed on May 2nd. There are over 200 contributions at the platform at the moment. From institutions, there are around 50 contributions. We're working at EBRAC and some other institutions as well on, compiling what the contributions look like, especially because most of them were submitted in Portuguese, which doesn't help, broaden the debate. But I think what has become clear, and this is an interesting point, is that the competition authority, for the first time, the Brazilian competition authority, came out in this public consultation and said, we do think that we need ex-ante regulation. We think that CADE, the competition authority, should be in charge and not the telecommunications agency, but we think that is necessary. This is probably going to propel a debate, and the consultation tried to do that already, on what are the Brazilian specificities, what are the specificities in our market that would need for, not copy-pasting the DMA or any other legislation elsewhere, because that tends to not be exactly a very good idea in any case. But it's the moment where we are right now, trying to come up with this new legislation. And I think what this speaks to this debate is that it would make a lot of sense and would be very important and very helpful if other global south jurisdictions were together on this effort and we're looking and speaking to one another about what these changes will be if they do happen, to not only have the EU or the US as, or even, Japan, South Korea as, references for what competition should look like in these jurisdictions, and what competition in regards to the digital platforms should look like. So, Nicole, I'll stop here because I know we're very short on time. Otherwise, we won't have time for final comments, but I can complement afterwards if we have additional time.
Yes, thank you very much. This concludes Dulcis in Fundo, our series of contribution, because I think it points out to the fact that, yes, there should be more collaboration across countries to deal with these complex challenges. One point that it raises, also connecting with the previous part of the discussion, is whether competition law or this specific regulation that is coming from the field of economic regulation should have as one of its objectives also the promotion of diversity in the media, which is something that, as we saw in the presentation of Daria, is not a driver of competition enforcement at the moment. It's more about diversity of business models, but not necessarily diversity of exposure to content for plurality of sources. And also, if we take into account what Xian was saying, that the DMA drives competition within platforms, and the DSA also is a centralization machine in certain manners. You know, it raises question of whether this is the appropriate venue or appropriate policy area to deal also with the parallel challenge of diversity in social media and digital media more generally. So I think this leaves us with a lot of questions. There were a lot of interesting provocations. I think at this point we can conclude with a final round of remarks by everybody, possibly reacting to what has been said. And then I leave the word finally to Mariana to conclude. So I will start maybe from the ones that have spoken at the start of the second segment to react to the other competition intervention if they have any thoughts or remarks, and then we can move to the previous group of speakers and conclude. So our first speaker was Maria Luisa.
Thanks, Nicolò. So this has been a tremendously intense conversation. So it's difficult to sort of comment or cherry pick and comment on anything specific. Let me do something different then. Let me try to add one point on your last question, which is this kind of interventions, they don't necessarily seem to look at diversity per se. So I do believe that what has emerged, and you asked whether this is the right framework or not. I do believe that there have been a lot of us, and also Darius has focused on this specifically, the qualitative aspect of diversity and so on and so forth. In the media sector, we can define diversity in so many different ways, and this diversity of voices, diversity of sources, diversity of consumption. So, you know, it goes all along the way. Just to say that in the media, I think maybe when the competition intervention is focused on creating plurality and diversity, maybe there is a lot to learn from the media, the traditional media environment, maybe to motivate some concept or some interpretations that could be something helpful. And I do believe that this is part of a trend that we're seeing in other cases, maybe more traditional than the recommended system environment. If you think about what's going on in the European Union with the European Media Freedom Act, for the first time, we have a sort of an attempt to harmonize a public interest test that is there to defend media plurality and independence in the media sector. And so it's a strong red lines to market concentration. If you allow me to think about it in this way, for protecting all the public interest. And there is a specific definition of what a media merger is in the European Media Freedom Act. I'm not sure I would totally endorse this definition. What I want to do here is to note that this has been at the center of a lot of debate. And part of this discussion has been, maybe we need to include specific online platforms into the media merger or media concentration definition, because plurality and diversity, they need to be protected in the entire value chain, and not only in the production segment or the distribution segment, and so on and so forth. So maybe this is an open door to this kind of conversation to happen already.
We love open doors. So I now pass to Daria to react.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, I think it was extremely inspiring discussion. What I want to say is, yeah, I think that it's really good that competition law has finally recognized it has a huge concentration problem that has been accumulating for quite a long time. So thank you, Camilla, for pointing this out. And I think that actually addressing diversity of like things that are more, openly related to competition law, such as diversity of ownership and diversity of business models, if competition law acts at least on them, it will also open new doors to promote diversity of content and diversity of opinion. Because, well, to me at least, and maybe I should, refer to some literature here, but I think to me it's quite natural that the more diverse models you have, the more diverse and the more independent kind of ownerships you have in the economy, the more, forum it is, the bigger the arena is for expressing, another opinion that is not somehow linked to the incumbent competitors. And actually, the competition authorities have this important decentralization function. They can act on it as well. And I'm referring here to this initiative that Sean mentioned on, a platform of platforms kind of sort of thing. In India, actually, this is something that the competition regulator advocated for and acted on. And they created this so-called open infrastructure, open platform for digital commerce, where the state, not only the competition authority, but also some other regulators, sectoral regulators, together with some of the business community, actually came up with an open platform like this, like an aggregator of aggregators. And this platform is actually working from what I Googled today. So I think if competition authorities kind of unite their efforts with the rest of the regulatory body, they can perfectly promote, solutions like that.
Absolutely. Thanks for ending with a concrete example. Marcela, any reactions as well?
Yeah, I think on my part, what I find most challenging, and perhaps ending on that note would be, not necessarily helpful, but important, is exactly finding the balancing between all of those tools that we discussed previously. So competition law is a part of this discussion and has increasingly been found to be a relevant part of this discussion. But as we saw previously, it is not the only tool. And I personally, being a person that comes from competition law, and I'm also somewhat skeptical as to whether it should be the most important solution for all of the problems. I mean, competition is very specific, and it comes from a very specific tradition also that sometimes makes it less malleable, let's say it, flexible to some ideas. So I think it can help. I think it should be included in the mix, but I don't think we should look at it as, as we were saying before, we have a toolbox. It's a tool that can be helpful for some things, but not the only tool that will be used to solve each and every problem for what we have before us. So just combining these strategies will necessarily be important.
Absolutely agreed. A strong message here is complementarity of these policies. I think we are all in agreement. So now let's shift to the non-competition speakers, let's say, in the order that we used initially. So perhaps starting from Joao, if he has any reaction to all this series of interventions or my questions that I previously posed, you have the word to offer some final remarks.
Thank you, Nicolo. I would say that I think we discussed here the challenges for finding what we can consider kind of a common ground for public interest, a normative public interest perception of what we're discussing. So I would say that along with pluralism and diversity, we should include and bring information integrity as a concept that talks about reliability, consistency, and accuracy of information. And that leads to all the debate on how sufficient, and of course we know that diversity is not sufficient itself, but I would like to have, we cannot put that off the table, neither put that on the table by itself standing alone, and because otherwise we're going to lose part of the challenges that have been brought by this new arrangement in the last 15 years. So for me, and I think, and I'm sure all the speakers here brought that as a complex issue. We're not simplifying the discussion, and I'm quite glad with that. But part of the answers that we're discussing have this challenge of trade-off between different values. And so I think this is, for me, the biggest challenge on how to go forward, really bringing this perspective of information integrity to the table. Thank you.
Absolutely. So complementarity not only between competition law and other areas, but also between pluralism as a solution and other types of solutions, which include, for example, media literacy. And I think the government is doing great work on that. So now the second speaker was Sean. Sean, do you want to offer?
I just want to give a little anecdote. Not long ago, I noticed that I was reading newspapers, my own selection of The Guardian or the Irish Times, very selectively. I was actually choosing the ones that gave me a little bit of pleasure, such as where I see people I don't like are being criticized or they're being imprisoned or something like this. And I actually began to analyze what I was doing. I began to see, why do I pick what I want to pick out of my newspapers? And actually, I discovered it's an exercise that's really well worth doing because I realized how small-minded a lot of my selections really are. I discussed this with my partner, Anya, and well, she agreed. But I suppose I'm making the case there for a deeper form of media education or literacy. And in fact, it's not even inconceivable that when we're talking about algorithms, that a positive algorithm could just tell you maybe why you are choosing the ones you are choosing and might educate you a little bit more about getting a more diverse set. In fact, since then, I've deliberately started reading ones that I don't want to read in order to kind of get the message there. I'm going to finish on that note. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We should have a recommendation algorithm that does that, see more of the other. So then the third speaker was Jean. Jean, do you want to offer anything?
Yeah, I just want to join Maria-Louisa's effort in joining the two fights, between media pluralism and competition law. I think it's crucial. We've made some sort of mistake in Europe, to disjoint the two in two different texts. And I think that if we want to address the issue of the attention economy, if you want to address the issue of the monopoly of a few over the information landscape, and this idea of the information environment is crucial. You used it, Joao, earlier. I think it's crucial to conceive that our environment is a matter of pluralism and openness, both in terms of markets and ideas. And I know it's, the kind of terms we use years after years, but they are still important and they are still not truly implemented in regulation today. So openness should be built through regulation. I think we have a major role to play as regulator, as thinkers of regulation, and it's our time now. So thank you very much.
Excellent. So openness and interoperability, not only in the market, but also in the regulatory field. It's very important. And last but not least, let's bring it back to Brazil. Camila, what should we do moving forward in Brazil? No, and any other reflection that you might have?
I will be more general, but saying that we can have lots of critics and doubts on the next phase, but what we have to agree is that the current state, the status quo, is terrible. We have to think in a balanced approach, but we have to understand that what we currently have, we cannot continue to have because of the impact on competition, democracy, and everything that we have mentioned. So 3 quick comments. First thing, current enforcement can be enhanced to be cooperatively complementary to the future digital markets regulation. So creating a digital markets regulation does not step away other kinds of regulation, but this has to be in a cooperative way. Second thing, the regulation, the public interest regulation that we are discussing have to have this holistic approach. So we are talking about market regulation, but we cannot close our eyes to the legal system, to fundamental rights, to human rights. Of course, the goal of the law must be tailored and well-defined. But plus one on Isia that when we are talking about regulation, we can fix problems, we can passively fix problems, but we can also have an approach that is actively reshaping the market. We have to focus on that as well. And third thing and last thing, we are in a key momentum that several stakeholders and several spaces are participating on the debate. G20 and UN agencies are creating the agenda, but we have to take a step further. So each jurisdiction, and now provoking also Brazil, have to take the next step in a participatory way and a balanced way to fundamental rights. Thank you.
Wonderful. And we look forward to engaging in these debates that will take place in Brazil over the next months. in that respect. Okay, so well, on my hand, I want to thank everybody. I will just make some shameless self-promotion about the competition week. You can follow us. We have online events over the course of the week. And also, we have published a policy brief on codes of conduct as a malleable instruments we were referring to earlier, which is up on our website. And I also want to thank my partner in crime, Mariana, for co-moderating the discussion and the whole series of events that we have done so far. It's been wonderful. So I leave the floor to you, Mariana, for final words.
Thank you so much, Nicolo. It was a pleasure from my side, and also on behalf of UNUE-Gov now. I would like to thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for this joint organization. I'm sure we will have tons of opportunities in the future, and I invite every one of you to go and look for our website to see what we do and how we can collaborate. Basically, just to finish, leave one keyword that is crucial to everything we do at UNUE-Gov, and I'm sure you will agree with me, that is transparency. Seeking for transparency in public policies in order to protect the public interest, in order to continue reinforcing the value and the centrality of basic human rights that nowadays are so being so challenged. Thank you so much. I think it's time for us to close with a huge thank you note as a final note. Thank you.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
See you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.